I'll never understand why conservatives are obsessed with the Great Replacement Theory. If you're unfamiliar with the subject, we're going to be going over it, and as you could expect, coming from the right, it is ridiculous. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Chadvocate channel, where we break down the daily news, politics, and policy, and I am your Chad host. So, today there has been an update on the Capitol Hill bomber at the Library of Congress. Just from seeing what was going on today, I think everybody had a feeling that it was probably a right-wing nut. Unfortunately, I always tend to think that that's where it's going to go these days. It's going to be some conservative who's pissed off because he's had his anger stoked by Fox News every single day, and if not Fox News, then online by Charlie Kirk type or Steven Crowder type, just getting pissed off all day. And my job is to, after I work 9 hours a day, come on here 3 days a week to react to their anger. First, let's take a look at this Capitol Hill bomber, and this just broke about an hour ago. After Capitol Hill bomb threat, GOP Rep Mo Brooks sympathetic to anger directed at dictatorial socialism, because of course. Republican Rep Mo Brooks on Thursday responded to a bomb threat that forced the evacuation of numerous buildings on Capitol Hill, but saying he understands citizenry anger directed at dictatorial socialism. The statement quickly drew heated criticism toward Brooks, who voted to overturn the election of President Joe Biden. Yeah, so he's getting criticized for this, obviously. I didn't read anything about the bomber's intent. Last I saw, the bomber's intentions were unknown. Oh yeah, I mean, Trin, they've been saying that Biden is a socialist dictator since he got into office. They think he's illegitimate. They think he shouldn't be there. Trump is the rightful president. And I was thinking a few days ago, I was online at the convenience store just grabbing a Gatorade or something, and the guy in front of me was trying to book a hotel room in DC. Now, this was at the beginning of August, and all of the rooms in Washington, D.C. were filled up. He couldn't find a hotel room. And that just made me think, do you think that these chuds are going to go to Washington, D.C. and start protesting again that Donald Trump should be reinstated? So far, that hasn't happened. I don't know when he was booking his trip. It was just a thought that popped into my head. Shit like this doesn't surprise me. When somebody gets pissed off enough that they keep getting it ingrained into their head that socialists are trying to take their money and give it to immigrants. So, speaking of immigrants, our boy Tucker Carlson, about 4 months ago now, back in April, he drew a lot of criticism for touting what is known as the Great Replacement Theory. So, what is the Great Replacement Theory? It's a white nationalist conspiracy, essentially, that elites, and in the Nazi propaganda terms, the Jews, are trying to replace the citizenry with immigrants and non-white, non-European new citizens, really, to replace them. So if you remember back to the good old days of Charlottesville, back in 2017, when they were marching around the streets like a bunch of dipshits, and yelling and chanting, Jews will not replace us. At the time, I was really unfamiliar with the Great Replacement Theory, and I couldn't really understand. I'm like, so they think that, Israelis are coming in to take their jobs? It didn't really make sense to the layperson, even though I do have a bachelor's in political science. I've never heard of this conspiracy in my readings and in my study. But once it was made known to me that Jews will not replace us meant that the Jewish elites are going to replace the whites with refugees, Mexican immigrants, with Guatemalan immigrants, just anybody who's not white. They were chanting, Jews will not replace us, meaning the elites, the Jewish elites, were going to start diluting their voting power by importing new voters. And you've seen this rhetoric ramped up when they tried to hype up the border crisis, as opposed to the COVID-19 crisis that was going on and is still currently going on. Greg Abbott and Ron DeSantis, they want to divert to the border crisis that is definitely a humanitarian crisis and needs to be taken care of. They were trying to shift the blame that these migrants were coming in, and I've said on a previous stream that they're spreading COVID, but COVID's not a big deal. And we don't need masks. Jesus is my mask. The flawed logic is just rampant all over the place. That's when they were starting to divert media attention to the southern border. And by doing that, Tucker Carlson went on air on Fox News and started touting the Great Replacement Theory. So, for those who don't quite remember, I had to dig a little bit to find this, unfortunately, so my YouTube search history is probably getting flagged by the CIA.
The host of Tucker Carlson Tonight on Fox News, and the brand new Tucker Carlson Today on Fox Nation, and after that comes Tucker Carlson This Morning and Tucker Carlson's Afternoon Tea. You won't want to miss that
Tucker
last
Carlson.
one. Tucker, you made a throwaway line, and the government says, that's a great idea. but only for people who shouldn't be in the country in the first place.
What does he mean by shouldn't be in the country in the first place? With that, smug, those people who shouldn't really fucking be here in the first place. What kind of people are you talking about? They ain't the right kind. It's a more elegant way of putting Trump's horseshit, which was, why are we getting people from these shithole countries? Trump, since he has no filter and half a fucking brain, didn't really code it very well. He just came out and said it.
I'm laughing because this is one of about 10 stories that I know you've covered, where the government shows preference to people who have shown absolute contempt for our customs, our laws, our system itself, and they're being treated better than American citizens. Now, I know that the left and all the little gatekeepers on Twitter become literally hysterical if you use the term replacement, if you suggest that the Democratic Party...
Right, just like all those people who stormed the Capitol when they actually took the data and the polling on the people who were arrested and showed up to the event were petite bourgeois kind of business owners who could take the time off to go and have a funsy day at the Capitol and overthrow democracy. Right, exactly. So the people watching this are fairly well-off, upper-middle-class whites that want to get enraged. So when they hear that somebody who is undeserving is being treated better than them or their fellow whites, they get fucking pissed off, even though it's not true at all. These people who have, come up from the southern border from Guatemala, El Salvador, just horrible fucking conditions. We want to be empathetic, and I think we should resettle everybody who's seeking asylum, because that is international law that they have a right to seek asylum in the United States. We just need to actually put the money and infrastructure behind processing these people faster. That would just start to snowball the extermination of the white race, as Tucker Carlson will probably allude to.
He's trying to replace the current electorate, the voters now casting ballots, with new people, more obedient voters from the third world. But they become hysterical because that's what's happening, actually. Let's just say it, that's true. If this was happening in your house, if you were in 6th grade, for example, and without telling you, your parents adopted a bunch of new siblings and gave them brand new bikes and let them stay up later and help them with their homework and gave them twice the allowance that they gave you, you would say to your siblings, I think we're being replaced by kids that our parents love more. And it would be kind of hard to argue against you because look at the evidence.
Out of his mind.
So this matters on a bunch of different levels, but on the most basic level, it's a voting rights question. In a democracy...
Who's actually being treated unfairly in the electoral system in the United States? This analogy, it has to be distilled down to, let's say that, you were the rightful child of your mother and father. So you were actually the fruit of their loins. They go and adopt two non-blood related children, these migrants, and they start getting, free bikes, better room, helped with their homework, and a little bit more allowance. But you, the rightful child, the actual child, aren't getting any of that. It's so dumb. It's actually perfect for his audience. That's the presumption, that if you're not an actual blood-related child, then you're not as good as an adopted child.
Welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. What a betrayal the war in Afghanistan turned out to be. Above all, it was a betrayal of the American public, the people who for 20 years paid for the occupation. It was a betrayal of the ones who died there, of course, and of the tens of thousands of Americans who will carry the scars from this disaster for the rest of their lives. They were lied to. We were all lied to, and we have a right to feel bitter about that. But the war in Afghanistan was also, if we're going to be complete...
The brilliance of the rhetoric of people like Tucker Carlson is they always start off with the statement that we can almost all universally agree on, that this is shitty. The military-industrial complex has lied to us for decades now, and the fall of Afghanistan is horrible. That's why the RNC pulled down, touting his accomplishments as negotiating with the Taliban. And, I started the withdrawal, but they couldn't stop it. That's why he's running away from it. I believe he did an interview with Tucker Carlson himself. He started going off into these tangents on these diatribes of North Korea and South Korea, India. Like, he's lost. He's like a child that when you start talking to them, you're like, so how was your day? Like, and Billy came over at the bike and he had the red cup, but I said that no, I want the green cup. It's child brain. Let's see what else he's got.
Completely honest about it, a betrayal of the Afghan people. Our leaders made promises to them they knew they couldn't keep. Honorable countries don't do that. It's shameful. Imagine being an Afghan employee at Bagram Air Base. You woke up the other morning to find your American patrons gone. They didn't tell you they were leaving, they just left. So what happens to you now in a country run by the Taliban? It's hard to think about that. And yet tonight, many Americans are thinking about it, and they're feeling distressed as they do. Americans are kind people and generous. They are quicker and more eager to help strangers than anyone else in the world. We haven't seen polling on it, but we bet if you asked 100 people, should we try to help Afghans who are facing persecution for helping us, most Americans would say, of course we should. And we should be glad that they say that. You should be happy you live in a country where your neighbors love children and dogs and want to help refugees. We are generous and empathetic people, and we should be proud. Unfortunately, there are many in our ruling class who are anxious to take advantage of that, anxious to take advantage of our best qualities. They see our decency and our weakness, and they exploit those things, and they do it relentlessly. Let's try to save our loyal Afghan interpreters, we tell them. Perfect, they think. We'll open the borders and change the demographic balance of this country.
And there it fucking is again. This I'm just asking questions white supremacist face. So he believes that our empathy and generosity is a weakness to be exploited, which is very telling of Tucker Carlson. You just said America is the best in the world at, yet even though we're the best in the world at that, it makes us weak. It's classic fascistic rhetoric. Our enemy is both unbelievably strong yet incredibly weak. That whole narrative, it just really ties together what he's trying to say. Even though we are extremely strong and generous, we're going to exploit it as a weakness. Oh, this is my white supremacist, white nationalist, curious face.
Of course, that's exactly what they're doing right now on our southern border, naturally in the name of human rights and compassion. And they would like to do the very same thing with the disaster unfolding in Afghanistan, the disaster that they created.
George W. Bush fucking created it. Let's just be completely fucking clear. By a president who was not elected by the majority of the country, mind you. So this great replacement theory to shift the demographic of the country was started by a president who was duly elected by a system that he didn't get the majority of the popular vote. For the last 30 years, Democrats have won almost all of the elections except for one, which was 2004, where Bush won re-election, mainly because we were in the middle of a war, and he was a wartime president. We won the popular vote for the last 30 years. But so far, there's been 3 terms of a Republican in office. But the real electoral quandary is with refugees, the elites who are going to replace us, shifting the demographics. It just seems like you're a racist, man.
Watch this kid from MSNBC yesterday. Remember as you watch that he is regarded with total seriousness in Washington as a foreign policy expert, and that his fellow foreign policy experts wholeheartedly agree with him.
We're talking about an evacuation of people who helped.
Okay, I don't know what this guy's gonna say. I think he's on our side, but I can't talk shit because I can't grow a mustache or a beard, and I'm almost fucking 30. But if that was what I had to grow, I just wouldn't. What is that fucking GTA 5 background we got here? Or it could be an original Bush.
The wars, and that's an obligation of the United States, but it's sort of a moral floor that's functioning as a moral ceiling. The United States, the Biden administration, pardon me, isn't doing things necessary like increasing TPS access, letting in refugees by the millions to escape their certain fate at the hands of the Taliban.
Based.
So we must, quote, let in refugees by the millions, said the mustachioed foreign policy expert. The millions.
All right, we can agree on the mustachio. That is the common ground here. But even the fact that he's using the Chiron, let refugees in by the millions, and that sentence alone will scare the shit out of his audience. Me personally, I don't give a flying fuck. Let them all in. I mean, there is a certain economic tipping point where you can't let in literally everybody around the world because we just don't have enough resources, but we are a very big country. At least get the refugees and people who want to get out of the country, get them into the United States and start the process. There's been reports where they've been in government facilities in Afghanistan trying to navigate State Department websites in English, and none of them speak English. That's the failure here. The Taliban was going to take over Kabul and Afghanistan eventually. As soon as America said, you know what, we're going to leave, and we pulled out the support, the Afghani military that we spent $88 billion funding, paying their salaries, just let their arms down and said, fuck it, we don't want it. That's why there wasn't a big struggle in these areas and provinces, these provincial capitals. They just left. Very similar to Mosul, where, you know, in the streets of Mosul in Iraq, when ISIS came, the Iraqi army that was supposed to be super fucking badass, that we trained and armed for a decade, just dropped their guns and said, fuck it, we're done. So we all knew this was going to happen. I don't know how fast we anticipated it, and I have a feeling that even Joe Biden was lied to a certain extent by the blob, the military-industrial complex, and was led to believe that it was going to take at least maybe a few months. That intelligence failure led to us not properly setting up the infrastructure that we needed at the State Department to process these refugees in a timely manner. So the scary part is the intelligence failure, not the refugees.
Millions. Millions is not a handful of loyal Afghan interpreters. That's not even a fleet of cargo planes full of loyal Afghan interpreters. Millions is a good chunk of the entire population of Afghanistan, brought to our country at our expense to live in your neighborhood at the very moment our national fabric is fraying, in case you haven't noticed, and the United States is becoming unmistakably poorer. And that's not just one man's eccentric opinion on MSNBC, you should know. All the clever people are saying exactly the same thing. The U.S. should take as many Afghan refugees as it can, demands a recent headline in New York Magazine. As many refugees as we can? How many refugees is that? And is it really a good idea to do that for us? Don't ask. You're not allowed to ask that question because asking...
Study after study shows immigrants, refugees, migrants coming to the United States across the board actually create more economic prosperity for those at the top. The only class of people that do not benefit immediately from migrants, refugees, immigrants, a new resource of workers coming into the country, or high school dropouts, where over a certain amount of time, I believe a year to 5 years, they lose, I think, 2.2% of what they would have earned, and then over a longer course of time, it's like 1%. But instead of scaring all of his viewers, maybe just do some, training or redistributive policies in order to get those 1 to 2% offset for that very slim subsection of the United States that drops out of high school.
He's racist. Watch.
The notion that their sort of horrific fear-mongering and racism doesn't carve out the men and women in Afghanistan who kept our soldiers alive for 2 decades is a new level of reprehensible.
So right-wing personalities using the crisis in Afghanistan to push an anti-refugee sentiment.
They're getting caught up in what I call the brown menace, which is this Trumper right-wing fear of people coming into the country from Central and South America.
I mean, fuck, they're right. I don't watch CNN or MSNBC. They're fucking nailing it on the head. I know a lot of leftists just want to, shit all over CNN, and I don't like Chris Cuomo. He's not taking any accountability for his brother's bullshit. We'll put that to the fucking side for now. Tucker Carlson's doing it right now. But I did come across an interesting clip from Fox News, of course, from a woman that they interviewed, and she looked familiar to me, and I couldn't really remember where I saw her from. And she's pushing the same narrative. It's from her congressional run in Baltimore. And the ad that she ran back then was this.
Do you care about Black lives? The people that run Baltimore don't. I can prove it. Walk with me. They don't want you to see this.
Kim Kalaki?
I'm Kim Klasick. This is Baltimore, the real Baltimore. This is the reality for Black people every single day. Crumbling infrastructure, abandoned homes, poverty, and crime. Baltimore has been run by the Democrat Party for 53 years. What is the result of their decades of leadership? Baltimore is one of the top 5 most dangerous cities in America. The murder rate in Baltimore is 10 times the U.S. average. The Baltimore poverty rate is over 20%. Homicide, drug, and alcohol deaths are skyrocketing in our city. Do you believe Black Lives Matter? I do. The vast majority of crime in Baltimore is perpetrated against Black people, who make up 60% of the population. So why don't we care about our communities? The Democrat Party have betrayed the Black people of Baltimore.
Maybe because the median household wealth for a Black family across the United States is like 1/10 of what it is for their white counterparts in the United States. I don't know what money they really have to reinvest in their communities when they don't have access to capital. I don't understand when they've been redlined into these certain districts for decades. See, what she began doing was correct. Identifying the problems, skyrocketing poverty, the murder rate, the crime, infrastructure crumbling, that she is almost misguided by running in a GOP field. Oh yeah, I mean, it's a complete facade. They would never fund these communities. Donald Trump tweeted at a historic Black congressman from Maryland, from Baltimore, that you should go back to your rat-infested city. People forget about that shit too. It was, abhorrent, and she's going to run on the GOP ticket for Congress. Obviously, she lost. It's Baltimore. Even a Black woman from Baltimore couldn't win that race. She's identifying the correct issues and problems, but their prescriptions are nothing. Democrats are bad. We can fix it, but they never ask, how do you plan on fixing it? Cutting taxes for the rich? And it'll trickle down to the community? There's never a solution. Oh yeah, I mean, she's just gonna start running down a list of complaints and grievances with no prescription.
Baltimore. If the politicians walk the streets like I do, they would see exactly how their policies and corruption affects us. But they don't want to see it. They don't want you to see this. Go to any Baltimore neighborhood and ask this question. Do you want to defund the police?
No.
No.
Absolutely not. I had 3 sons killed in Baltimore City. And I think if we defund the police office, it's going to be worse than that. So no, I'm opposed to that.
What are you going to defund the police for? Why? How do you defend your city, your community? Families are losing people.
It's not just Baltimore. The worst place for a
And this is where I start to get aggravated with rad libs socialists when they start advocating on social media, pushing the narrative to defund the police. When actually, none of our politicians want to defund the police. But reallocate funds into more health and human services is not as catchy as a slogan, which I understand. Mis-sloganeering during a congressional race or any sort of national race is gonna get us absolutely fucking killed. Who is it down in South Carolina helped Biden win? I think it's the majority whip down in South Carolina. That was one of his prescriptions as to why we didn't pick up enough seats in the 2020 election. Seems like you have to speak to a less nuanced position when you're going for a broader and broader audience. That's just how you have to address it. A nuanced policy focus as a slogan is not going to work. I think what would have worked is probably demilitarize the police. You know, so when protests like that happen, like the Black Lives Matter protest that broke out across the country, you don't see people getting trapped by leftover tanks from Iraq and Afghanistan.
black person to live in America is a Democrat-controlled city. It's 2020. Name a blue city where black people's lives have gotten better. Try. I'll wait. Look at this. How are children supposed to live here and play here?
It's like she just went
Democrats
to
think
like
black
where they
people
filmed
are
The
stupid.
Wire. I don't see
They think they
anybody
can
out.
control us forever. That we won't demand better and that we'll keep voting for them forever, despite what they've done to our families and our communities. Are they right? I'm Kim Klacik, and I'm running for Congress because I actually care about black lives. All black lives matter. Our communities matter. Baltimore matters. And black people don't have to vote Democrat.
What do you want to do? This is the inverse of, if anybody's seen Parks and Rec, of when Leslie Knope did her campaign for city council, and she just listed all of the things that she's for going by the screen, and you couldn't read them fast enough, but they were all really sound policy positions, yet Knope 2024. I'm not once you say I'm running for city council, when the election is, what ticket she's on, it's the complete opposite. It's like, I am anti-Democrat, our cities are crumbling, Democrats suck, vote for me. No prescriptions, no policy, nothing laid out for the future. She obviously lost, and I believe got absolutely killed, but that's not the point of what she was going for here. What she was trying to do is exactly what she got, which is, of course, a spot on Fox News. That's what she was angling for.
State and local leaders across the country are offering to take in refugees amid bipartisan calls to swiftly evacuate tens of thousands of Americans and our allies in Afghanistan.
But our next guest says accepting refugees in her city of Baltimore would be a lose-lose for everyone involved, especially the most vulnerable. Former Maryland congressional candidate Kim Klacik joins us now. Kim, great to see you. Here is the tweet from the mayor, Mayor Brandon M. Scott, quote, since 1999, Rescue.org has resettled thousands of refugees in Baltimore who've made significant contributions to our city and nation. As mayor, I will proudly welcome refugees from Afghanistan in search of a new home. Hashtag be more welcoming. Be, of course, referencing Baltimore. Why do you say the mayor should reconsider, Kim?
Well, unfortunately, our mayor seems to not have his
scary,
priorities
right?
right. We have a humanitarian crisis here in Baltimore ourselves.
Exactly.
My first question would be, where would we house these individuals, right? According to
I do remember seeing a lot of abandoned homes in Baltimore that maybe some of this infrastructure money could go towards. Yeah, that ghost town you were just in, Kimmy. If you put more money into those communities and rebuilt those housing facilities, maybe they'd be able to resettle there and then start businesses give them access to capital, grow in the community, have their children and their families assimilate into American life and culture, which always happens. The very next generation always sees themselves as more American than where their parents came from. We saw this even as far back as, like West Side Story. Everyone that I've grown up with from a Puerto Rican background, they don't speak Spanish. One of my closest friends, his dad came to America right when we became an American territory. None of them in their family, besides the Mr. and Mrs., spoke Spanish. They identify as Americans, not as, Puerto Ricans when they were an independent nation. I've never understood this fear. Anybody that goes to a public American high school and wants to assimilate with their peers becomes American. And maybe they bring some of their influences from where they came from to broaden our cultural fabric, which would be fantastic. I love that.
Department of HUD, we currently have 2,600 people that are without shelter just right now. Now, a lot of these people coming across from Afghanistan, unfortunately, they left their home with just the shirts on their backs. We currently have a poverty rate of 21.8%. Now, if you include the fact that I was just on the show 3 weeks ago talking about our Baltimore City Police Commissioner begging for federal resources because we don't have enough officers on patrol. We're actually down 600 officers to protect the citizens that we currently have. And not to mention, our Baltimore City public school system is also not doing their job. We currently have 41% of our Baltimore City high school students with a 1.0 and below GPA.
Well, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. When you fund your local schools by property taxes, and those property taxes are very low in those neighborhoods, like inner city and poor communities, like in Baltimore, when they don't have the property taxes to fund the schools, it continually gets worse, so there's no money coming back into the community. What the real problem is, and what she will never, ever in a million years advocate for, is statewide or federal funding for public schools. So if all the property taxes go into one bucket and then equally distributed to each schooling district, you could actually get an influx of money into that community, rebuild those public schools, reinvest in the police departments and retraining them at a state level, since you don't want the federal government at all. But that would be a good start. Again, she's not giving any prescription. She's just bitching about shit. Just like Tucker Carlson was just bitching about migrants. They're getting these, the bicycle and the better room in mommy and daddy's house, but you're the real child. It's horseshit. And I don't know how people continually fall for it.
So how on earth can we take any more people? I just don't understand.
Yeah, but Kim, I mean, you look at the images, you look at the pictures, you look at the video, you see what's happening to women, you see what's happening to children, you see people throwing their children over the walls at the airfield just to be able to get them out of harm's way. I mean, how do we not help those who we have, by the way, promised we would help?
Yeah, and I believe that we should still continue to help. Our governor here in Maryland, he said just 2 days ago that we could take in 180 refugees and do it responsibly. I think it should be left up to the governor of the state. I don't think the Baltimore mayor should have...
You can't handle 180, right? That's too many? A cool $180. Nope. That is less than the amount of people that were just shown on that plane. It's a high school gym's worth. And a small high school, not even a regional high school. But this is exactly what congressional runs on grievance politics, all Republican and conservative political strategy, is just grievance politics at this point. But she was really just angling to be another mainstream kind of Candace Owens figure. She would have had a really good friend in Marjorie Taylor Greene, perhaps. I don't even know if Marjorie Taylor Greene would have been friends with her. Or maybe a Lauren Boebert. Because at least Lauren Boebert, although doesn't have a high school degree, or at least she can't prove she does, at least she's smart enough to not go on tour with a sex trafficker, Matt Gaetz, and an absolutely insane person who just learned about the Holocaust, Marjorie Taylor Greene. All of this talk about, the immigrants coming to replace us, they're diluting your vote. Something came up on my Instagram that said, our electoral college system is so broken that a president can actually win the presidency with only 22% of the popular vote. So they got their source from an older video, still holds true today, but let's take a look at this because it's shocking. Just as a precursor, so anybody who comes to you and says, well, that's fine because we're actually a republic, not a democracy or a democratic republic, just please tell them that from somebody who's read the fucking Federalist Papers, the first several articles of the Federalist Papers mention the United States is a democratic republic. And the later articles, they do not preface it with a democratic republic because it gets redundant. So they just use the term republic. There's no need to continue to say democratic republic, democratic republic. It's implied from the first two articles. So when people say that, it's factually incorrect. The same people that will throw a constitution in your face or the Federalist Papers in your face. They've never read it.
In a fair democracy, everyone's vote should count equally, but the method that the United States uses to elect its president, called the Electoral College, violates this principle by making sure that some people's votes are more equal than others. The Electoral College is, essentially, the 538 votes that determine who wins the presidency. If these votes were split evenly across the population, every 574,000 people would be represented by one vote. But that's not what happens because the Electoral College doesn't give votes to people, only states, which has some unfair consequences. For example, there are 11.5 million people in Ohio, so, to fairly represent them, it should get 20 electoral votes. But the Electoral College doesn't give Ohio 20 votes, it only gets 18, 2 less than it should. Where those other votes go? To states like Rhode Island. Plucky Rhode Island has 1.1 million people in it, so it should have about 2 votes, but instead it gets 4. Those extra 2 votes that should be representing Ohioans go to representing Rhode Islanders instead. Why? Because, according to the rules of the Electoral College, every state, no matter how few people live there, gets 3 votes to start with before the rest are distributed according to population. Because of this rule, there are a lot of states with a few people that should only have 1 or 2 votes for president but instead get 3 or 4. So Georgians, Virginians, Michiganders, and Jerseyites are each missing 1 vote. Pennsylvanians, North Carolinians, Ohioans, and Hoosiers are missing 2, Floridians are missing 4, New Yorkers 5, Texans 6, and Californians are 10 votes short of what they should get.
Keep in mind, this is from 2011, I thought we said. Hoosiers, yeah, I don't know what that means. Yeah, Illinois is the Hoosiers, and Ohio is the Buckeyes. But yeah, so this data is now going to be different because the census data came out, and Texas and Florida are getting 2 more congressional seats, so Texas is not, 4 short? They're going to be now 3 short. In Florida will no longer be 3 short, it'll be 1 short.
Because of this vote redistribution, the Electoral College essentially pretends that fewer people live where they do and more people live where they don't. An American who lives in one of these states has their vote for president count for less than an American who lives in one of these states. In some cases, the Electoral College bends the results just a little, but if you live in a particularly large or small state, it bends them a lot. 1 Vermonter's vote, according to the Electoral College, is worth 3 Texans' votes, and 1 Wyomingite's vote is worth 4 Californians. Now whoa, hold on there, son, you might be saying to yourself right now. You're missing the whole point of the Electoral College. It's to protect the small states from the big states. Give the small states more voting power and the presidential candidates will have to pay them more attention in an election. If that's the goal of the Electoral College, it's failing spectacularly. Here's a graph showing the number of visits the president.
Yeah, I mean, what he's going off of is known as the Great Compromise. So, and this has nothing to do with the Electoral College. That statement he just said is to protect small states from larger states, so larger states aren't completely overrepresented. That's not correct. That statement is actually from the Great Compromise. And that's how we got a bicameral government. So as they were writing the Constitution, there were 2 plans. There was the Virginia plan, and there was the New Jersey plan. The New Jersey plan was for every state gets 2. So it doesn't matter if you're Rhode Island, or if you're Virginia, or if you're New Jersey or Virginia, because those were the 2 competing. Every state gets 2 senators. Virginia said, well, that's kind of bullshit. We have more people to represent, so we should actually do it based on population. So the Great Compromise in the Constitution led to the bicameral government, a Senate and a House of Representatives. Although the House of Representatives has now been bastardized by gerrymandering, but that's neither here nor there, so the actual claim, the Electoral College, is meant to protect small states from larger states. That is incorrect.
Presidential candidates paid to each of the states in the last 2 months of the previous election. If it looks like there are a few states missing, you're right. Only 18 of the 50 states received even a single visit from a candidate, and just 2 of those states, Maine and New Hampshire, have very small populations. The area of the country with the most small states is conspicuously missing. The Electoral College doesn't make candidates care about small states. But interestingly, the biggest states, California, Texas, and New York, are missing as well. So what's going on? Looking closer, just 4 states, Ohio, Florida, Pennsylvania, and Virginia, received a majority of the candidates' attention during the election. And if you follow the money, it's the same story. Why do candidates spend so much money and time in so few states? Because the way the Electoral College works forces them to do so. The elections are winner take all. As long as a candidate gets just over 50% of the popular vote in a state, he wins 100% of that state's electoral votes. That means winning by millions of citizens' votes is no better than winning by a single vote, so candidates are safe to ignore states where they poll with big margins.
Yeah, winner take all.
Instead, the Electoral College makes candidates intensely interested in the needs of just a few states with close races to the detriment of almost all Americans, which is why it should be abolished. But wait, you might say, won't abolishing the Electoral College and voting directly for president cause candidates to spend all their time in big cities? That wouldn't be fair to most Americans either. This sounds like a reasonable fear, but ignores the mathematical reality of population distribution. There are 309 million people in the United States, only 8 million of which live in New York, the largest city by far. That's 2.6% of the total population. But after New York, the size of cities drops fast. LA has 3.8 million people and Chicago has 2.7. But you can't even make it to the 10th biggest city, San
Granted,
Jose,
these numbers
before you're
have
under a million
fluctuated, but
people.
not by that
These
much.
top 10 cities added together are only 7.9% of the popular vote, hardly enough to win an election.
So when people say that they need to be protected in, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, big states with little populations, when they say we need to be protected from the cities, it's about 8% of the population. Protect you from fucking what?
And even winning the next 90 biggest cities in the United States, all the way down to Spokane, is still not yet 20% of the total population. So unless there's a city with a few 100 million people hiding somewhere in America that's been left out of the census, the idea that a candidate can just spend their campaign jetting between New York, LA, and Chicago while ignoring everyone else and still become president is mathematically ludicrous. Want to see the real way to unfairly win? How you can become president with only 22% of the popular vote by taking advantage of the Electoral College today.
Now this is fucking wild. It's not surprising, but it's fucking wild.
Don't believe that's possible in a democracy? Just watch. Here's the action plan. Win the votes of the people who count the most and ignore the people who count the least. Start with Wyoming, the state where 0.18% of Americans live, but who get 0.56% of the Electoral College votes for president. And because it's a winner-take-all system, you don't need all of them to vote for you, just half plus one, or 0.09%. Next up is the District of Columbia, where winning 0.1% of the population gets you an additional 0.56% of the Electoral College. Then add in wins in Vermont and North Dakota and Alaska. Notice how the votes you're getting to win the presidency go up much faster than the percent of the population who voted for you because of the Electoral College's rules. Next is South Dakota, then Delaware, Montana, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, Maine, Hawaii, Idaho, Nebraska, West Virginia, New Mexico, Nevada, Utah, Kansas, Arkansas, Mississippi, Iowa, Connecticut, Oklahoma, Oregon, Kentucky, Louisiana, South Carolina, Alabama, Colorado, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Maryland, Missouri, Tennessee, Arizona, Indiana, Massachusetts, Virginia, and New Jersey. Congratulations! By taking advantage of the unfair rules and winning states, not people, you've won a majority in the Electoral College even though 78% of the population voted against you.
So if you notice what he did, and just to break it down a little bit, every state that this hypothetical candidate won only won 50% plus one. So he didn't win every single person's vote in the states that they won in the winner-take-all system. And on top of that, he's adding in, let's say that the other candidate who lost in this system won 100% of California, 100% of Texas. Not a single vote went for the winner candidate who only won 22% of the vote.
This is not democracy, this is indefensible. While this particular scenario is unlikely, if you have a voting system that allows losers to win, you shouldn't be surprised when they do. Not once, not twice, but thrice in American history.
This is 2011, now 4 times. Trump in 2016.
The candidate with the most votes from the people actually lost because of the Electoral College. 3 errors in 55-plus elections is a failure rate of 5%. Would anyone tolerate a sport where, by a quirk of the rules, there was a 5% chance that the loser would win?
Well, now it's like 7 or 8%.
Not likely. Given how much more important electing the President of the United States is, that's a rather dangerously high percentage of the time to get it wrong. If we abolish the Electoral College and simply let citizens vote for the President directly, all of these problems will go away and everyone's vote will be equal.
What is the remedy to this? It's known as the Interstate Compact. We have been bitching about this forever. They brought this up in like 1960s or something. There's a congressman that said we need to do away with this. Made a speech in Congress that, what happened in the 1800s, that's some old shit. We can't let that happen again, where the will of the people cannot be subverted by the Electoral College system. But it favors Republicans, and of course it did not get passed.
America's unique way of picking her president. For it or against it, you might want to know there's a plan to use the Electoral College to subvert the Electoral College. It's a sneaky plan, and to understand, remember that while it feels like citizens pick the president in one big election, they don't. The 50 states pick the president. Oh, and District of Columbia. But not you, Puerto Rico. Come back when you're a state. How the states come together and how they vote is what the Electoral College is. Each state gets votes proportional to her population plus 2, and is free to cast these votes however she wants. Most look at how their citizens voted and give all their Electoral College votes to the statewide winner. But they don't have to. A couple states cast their votes proportional-ish to their citizens' preferences. But states are free to vote however, including against the preferences of their citizens. Let's make a note of that. But back to this plus 2, which is why some citizens...
That's what Trump was really trying to do in 2020. He's trying to get those states that he lost to go against his citizenry, which doesn't happen. And in all fairness, there were some people on the left that were trying to get state electors to vote for Hillary Clinton in states that she lost. At least that was somewhat more acceptable because she won the popular vote by 3 million. But it's a little bit more understandable that somebody would push for, like, say, like Pennsylvania, where it was super close, to get their state government to actually throw their electors behind Hillary Clinton. I was not advocating for that, even though I was scared shitless of a Trump presidency at the time. You know, rightfully so, as we saw. It was kind of worse than I thought. This is exactly what Trump was trying to do. He's trying to get Georgia. I'm just trying to find 11,000 votes. I remember getting up in the morning. It was fucking raining. I remember it was raining, and I was driving to work. And if anybody knows, like, if you've seen any of the streams, I work in finance. So I knew walking into the building that day, people were going to be losing their shit and were fucking elated. And I was having a panic attack. Actually, right across the street from my building was Trump International Golf Course in fucking Bedminster. So yeah, that sucked balls. So while I was still working there, sometimes I'd hit traffic going to work in the middle of nowhere, New Jersey, because, you know, Trump wanted to play a few rounds and not do shit that week, so.
Really don't like the Electoral College. The +2 means the states less populous produce preponderant presidential picking power per person. At the extremes, some states get 1 vote per low 100,000 people and some states 1 vote per high 100,000. This is how the Electoral College sometimes picks a president that nationwide most citizens didn't, because roughly 80% of the state's votes are given by population and 20% aren't. This is on purpose. Dividing power between the levels of citizen, state, and federal is and was a central point of the Constitution. It's a compromise-stitution. So if you went back in time to when the states were about to finalize the deal, yelling, "Don't sign that document, I'm from the future," you're creating an electoral college where votes for president are distributed proportionally-ish, not perfectly proportionally. The reply would be, yes, that's one of the many compromises we agreed upon. But because of that, sometimes a president will be elected with a minority of the popular vote. Yes, but the people.
Yeah, I mean, the framers of the Constitution had a lot of really good ideas. This was not one of them. Also, counting black people as 3/5 of a person, I think we can agree was a fucking bad idea. The Republicans or conservatives try to deify these people as somehow, you know, Jesus Christ himself came down and handed us the Constitution. It's not fucking right. It's not true.
You can't trust the people. Do you think this compromise institution is for a direct democracy, lol? We're building a republic here. Yes, I know, but would you...
This is incorrect. Like I said before, in the Federalist Papers that were arguing for a federal government which the Constitution was implementing, it said democratic republic, not just republic. So this is a common misconception.
You just look at this spreadsheet of
How many
proportion.
states are there in the future?
50, maybe 51, depending on how. Wow, what a tremendous success. Go compromise institution. No, can we focus? Do you even own land? No. Then why would we listen to you? Goodbye. Thus, the Electoral College is doing what it was designed to do totally on purpose, and the Supreme Court has reaffirmed this. So if you don't like the
And again, also historically, it was thrown in at the very last minute, the Electoral College. They had everything else signed, sealed, and ready to go. And the Electoral College was one of the very last things that they agreed upon just to kind of push it through. It wasn't a very well thought out plan. I'm saying that this is working exactly as intended, I guess, yes. But also it wasn't as intentional as he's making it seem in this video.
Electoral College, then tough noogies for you. And if you do, then nothing to worry about. The Electoral College, in a fortress of axiomatic constitutionality, has survived for 1,000 generations of this republic. The only way to break through the front gate would be with a constitutional amendment, but getting enough states to push on the same side of that gromulent tool, while not theoretically impossible, is legislatively improbable. This is where the sneaky plan comes in. Did you forget about that? Don't worry. I got carried away. There is a back door that, if breached, can turn the constitutional fortress protecting the Electoral College into a prison. The sneaky plan is named the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. It's a terrible name, probably on purpose to hide sneakiness behind boringness as bureaucratic paperwork camouflage. But I'm calling it Napa Vote Interco, which is sort of not really better, but whatever. Here are the sneaky deets. 1. Assume destroying the constitutional protections of the Electoral College is impossible. Point 2 is the note from before that states can cast their Electoral College votes however they want. These are just facts, but if a state signs on the dotted line, point 3 is the big deal. Napa Vote Interco members agree to cast their Electoral College votes for the candidate who gets the most votes from citizens nationwide. This is the national popular vote in Napa Vote Interco. The idea behind 2 + 3 is to make it impossible to have a president most of the citizens didn't vote for. A state would look not only at the result in her borders, but the result nationwide and vote that way, which is all fine and dandy if the state citizens voted with the majority anyway. But if they didn't, well, you can see a flaw with the plan. Any singular state assaulting the Electoral College on her own, carrying votes against her own citizens, it's political suicide from without and within. So the plan, had it only 3 points, is something no state would agree to, requiring one last sneak. Point 4, the plan does not go into effect until enough states with enough votes to control the Electoral College as a bloc join. So, as states sign up,
So that's the key. The states that have signed on so far to the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, they're not throwing their electoral votes towards the popular vote winner at this point, as we've seen in 2016. They need 270 electoral votes, states that combine to that, and then bang, it goes into effect. Like you said, it's kind of a sneaky backdoor way to do it, but that's fine with me. I don't give a shit as long as we get rid of this electoral college, which might kick off, a constitutional amendment to fully just get rid of it. Okay, Green indicates the National Popular Vote Bill has been enacted into law. Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New York, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, Washington, D.C., Illinois, California, Hawaii. Orange indicates passage by one legislative chamber. So in orange in Oklahoma, Arizona, Arkansas, Michigan, Minnesota. So right now we have 195 electoral votes. Well, I mean, it's really not up to them. If we can get Democratic majorities in some of these battleground states, if we get all of this, the orange and yellow, to join, it really doesn't matter if Congress wants to do anything or not, because then the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact triggers. Even if Congress doesn't want to vote for it, Democrats can turn around and say, hey, bitch, fucking states' rights. So that's how that works. I think if you get enough states finally to sign on, and I believe even a majority of the public wants this to go into effect. Poll shows that more than 70% support a nationwide vote for president. People want this, but we've seen 70% approval for certain legislative initiatives fall by the wayside. But it doesn't matter if Mitch McConnell doesn't want it. If the states do it, it doesn't matter, because the states can allocate their vote however they want, and actually upheld by the Supreme Court recently that states have the right to allocate their electoral college votes however they want, which on one hand, upon first looking at it, seems bad when Trump was trying to steal the presidential election. Right, it's not the most elegant way to go about it, but it's the only way to do it without a constitutional amendment. And if we can normalize that it's just a straight popular vote, even though 70% of the people want it, if we're trying to go the more traditional route, again, I've been saying it for weeks now, that we need to reform gerrymandering and redistricting, but it's something that looks like we're not going to move on. And unless we tackle very root issues in our democracy, this is a far cry from ever being enacted federally. So the only way to do it is through this backdoor policy where we just get a coalition of states to say, hey, we're just going to go by the popular vote. I think that's it for today. So yes, thank you all for joining the channel, and I will see you next week.